The night Loretta Haines walked out of St. Michael's Hospital with nothing but a plastic bag and a discharge form. The temperature in Halifax had dropped to -14. She had been in that hospital for 6 weeks. Not because of the accident. The accident had only taken 3 days to patch up, 2 cracked ribs and a hairline fracture along her left wrist. She had stayed because Gordon had told her to stay, because he said he needed time, because she had believed, the way a person believes in something they have repeated to themselves so many times it stops feeling like faith and starts feeling like fact, that he would come back. He did come back. On a Tuesday morning when the hallway smelled like floor wax and someone down the corridor was watching a game show at full volume. He came back with a folder of papers and a look on his face she had never seen before. Not anger, not grief, just the blank administrative expression of a man who had already moved on and was now completing the paperwork. "The house is in my name," he said. "You know that." She did know that. "The lease on your car runs out in February. I won't be renewing it." She said nothing. There was nothing to say that would matter. Gordon set the folder on the edge of her hospital bed, the way you set something down when you don't want to be accused of throwing it. "I spoke to a lawyer. You're entitled to a settlement. It's fair." He paused. "I just need you to understand that I can't do this anymore. We've tried everything, Loretta. There's nothing left to try." By everything, he meant the 4 rounds of IVF, the appointments with 3 different specialists, the dietary changes, the supplements, the acupuncture clinic on Barrington Street, where she had lain on a narrow table once a week for 8 months and stared at a water-stained ceiling tile and tried to believe that the small steel needles in her skin were doing something the doctors hadn't managed. She was 41 years old. The doctors had used words like diminished ovarian reserve and unlikely and, eventually, accept. Gordon had never learned to accept. He had a daughter from his first marriage, a girl who lived with her mother in Moncton and called him twice a year. He wanted more children. He had always wanted more children. Loretta had known this and had married him anyway at 36, when she had still believed that wanting something badly enough was a kind of guarantee. The plastic bag held a change of clothes, her phone charger, a paperback novel she hadn't opened, and a small wooden box her mother had given her the year before she died, painted blue, the clasp worn smooth from handling. She held it against her chest as she walked out of the hospital into the parking lot and stood there for a moment under the fluorescent awning. Not because she was waiting for anything, but because she didn't know which direction to go. The taxi she called took 11 minutes. She had the driver take her to a motel on Roby Street that she'd seen once from a bus window and remembered because of the sign. The Harbor Inn, letters in blue neon that buzzed faintly in cold weather. She paid for 2 nights with her credit card and sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like other people's sleep and opened the folder Gordon had left. He was right that it was fair. That was almost the worst part. He had been precise and thorough and reasonable, the way he was about everything. She signed where the lawyer had marked with small adhesive arrows and put the folder in the nightstand drawer. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke up, it was dark again, or dark still, she wasn't sure which. The second morning, she walked. She had always walked when she didn't know what else to do. It was something she'd learned from her mother, who believed that the body needed to be moving when the mind was stuck. She walked down Quinpool Road past the coffee shops and the used bookstore and the dry cleaner with the hand-lettered sign in the window. She walked until she reached the public gardens and found a bench near the pond, swept clear of snow by the wind, and sat down. She was not crying. She had cried in the hospital, in the shower, in the particular way you cry when you're trying not to make noise. She was past that now. What she felt now was something more like the stillness after a storm. Not peace, not quite, but a kind of clarified emptiness, as if everything unnecessary had been scoured away. It was here on this bench that Lawrence Whitmore sat down beside her. She didn't notice him at first. She was watching a crow on the ice, picking at something with methodical indifference. Then she became aware of a presence to her left and looked over. A man in his mid-50s, she guessed, in a coat that had seen better winters. Dark wool, one button replaced with something slightly too large. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, one in each hand, and he held one out toward her without saying anything. "I'm sorry," Loretta said. "You've been sitting here for 20 minutes, he said, in a coat that's not warm enough. I was getting coffee anyway." She looked at the cup. It was from the cart near the Sackville Street entrance. She'd walked past it on the way in. You went back out to get me a coffee. It's just coffee. She took it. It was the right thing to do, and she had learned recently that when the right thing to do presented itself clearly, you should do it without overthinking. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He didn't ask why she was there, didn't introduce himself with the usual urgency people brought to conversations with strangers. He just sat beside her and drank his coffee and watched the crow, which had now been joined by a second crow, and was not pleased about it. After a while he said, "The gardens are better in April. If you're still around." "I don't know where I'll be in April," Loretta said. It came out more honestly than she'd intended. He glanced at her then, just briefly. "Fair enough," he said, and looked back at the crows. His name, she learned eventually, not that morning, but in the weeks that followed, was Lawrence Whitmore. He lived in a Victorian semi-detached on South Park Street that he had bought 15 years ago, when the neighborhood was still affordable and had barely touched since. He drove a 2009 Volvo wagon with a cracked rear bumper and a parking permit for the Dalhousie campus stuck in the corner of the windshield. He wore, with almost startling consistency, the same rotation of flannel shirts and dark trousers that could have come from any decade of the past 40 years. What she did not know that morning, and would not know for some time, was that Lawrence Whitmore was the founder and chairman of a software infrastructure company called Whitmore Systems, which had been quietly powering the billing and logistics operations of 4 major Canadian healthcare networks for the past 12 years. He had sold a minority stake in it 8 years ago for a figure that, when she eventually read it in a business profile she found by accident, made her sit very still for a long moment and then go make tea. He was not the kind of man who mentioned this. The job came about because of his daughter, Elspeth. Loretta met Elspeth 3 days after the bench, when she was walking back from the pharmacy on Spring Garden Road, and nearly collided with a girl of about 12 coming out of a music shop with a violin case, and no particular awareness of her surroundings. Elspeth. Lawrence, who had been 2 steps behind, caught the girl by the shoulder. "Watch where you're going, please." The girl looked up at Loretta with the frank, appraising gaze of a child who had not yet learned to disguise her assessments. "Sorry," she said, not sounding especially sorry. Then, "I know you. You're the woman from the bench." "Elspeth," Lawrence said again with the tone of a man who had said a particular name in a particular tone many thousands of times. "She was sitting on our bench," Elspeth told him, as if this explained everything. "I saw you from the path. You were there for a long time." She shifted the violin case to her other shoulder. "Are you okay now?" "Yes," Loretta said. "Thank you for asking." "Good." The girl nodded, satisfied, and kept walking. Lawrence caught Loretta's eye briefly, a look that was mostly apology, but carried around its edges something that might have been amusement. "She's very direct," he said. "She's wonderful," Loretta said, and meant it. He hesitated on the pavement for a moment, just a moment, the briefest recalibration. "We were going to get lunch, if you haven't eaten." She hadn't eaten. She went. Over lunch at a Lebanese place on Queen Street that Elspeth had chosen with great authority, Loretta learned that Lawrence had been alone with his daughter for 4 years, since his wife, Marguerite, had died of a brain aneurysm at 52. Quick, catastrophic, no warning. That he worked from home most days, but traveled occasionally to Toronto and Vancouver, and twice a year to a client in Edinburgh. That Elspeth took violin lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays, had opinions about everything, and had been through 3 housekeepers in the past year and a half because, as Elspeth put it without apparent remorse, they had all been wrong. "Wrong how?" Loretta asked. "One didn't like the cat," Elspeth said. "One kept rearranging things, and the last one talked too much when Dad was working." Lawrence looked like he wanted to say something in mitigation and couldn't find the exact right words, so he said nothing and ate his kibba. "What do you do?" Elspeth asked Loretta. It was the question Loretta had been dreading. For 15 years she had been a landscape architect. She had a portfolio, references, 3 parks in the Halifax regional municipality that she had helped design. But her last position had ended 18 months ago when the firm she worked for was bought out and restructured. And since then she had been doing consulting work, small projects, nothing that felt like solid ground. And then the accident. And then the hospital. And then Gordon and the folder with the adhesive arrows. "I'm in between things at the moment," she said. Elspeth accepted this with the equanimity of someone for whom, in between things, was simply a state of being, like having a cold or waiting for spring. Lawrence said nothing, but when they were leaving, while Elspeth was pulling on her coat with the focused effort of someone who considered every zipper a minor adversary, he said quietly, "She needs someone consistent. I've been trying to work around the gaps, but I travel in March. I haven't been able to find someone who's—" He paused. "Right." Loretta looked at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm mentioning a situation," he said. "The job part is up to you." She said yes on a Wednesday and moved into the spare room on a Friday. The house on South Park Street was the kind of house that had been loved unevenly over many years. Good bones, good light, but evidence of neglect in the small things, the kind of things that accumulate when someone is managing alone. A screen door that didn't quite close. A bathroom tile that had come loose and been leaned against the wall rather than regrouted. A kitchen calendar still showing October of the previous year. The cat was named Brigadier and was enormous and orange, and regarded Loretta for the first 3 days, with the deep suspicion of an animal who had learned that new people in the house were a temporary condition. Elspeth showed her everything with the efficiency of a small CEO conducting an orientation, where the good mugs were kept, which burner on the stove ran hot, the precise location of the violin Rosen because it had been lost once, and the loss had been significant. She showed Loretta her room, pale blue walls, a corkboard dense with drawings and photographs and a map of Nova Scotia with small paper flags at various locations, and explained her homework schedule with a clarity that suggested she had explained it to several people before and found the exercise exhausting. "Tuesday is bad," she said. "I come home tired and I don't want to talk." "Is that okay?" "Tuesday is fine," Loretta said. Elspeth looked at her for a moment with that same frank assessment. "The last one wanted to know all about my day right when I got home. Every day. I won't do that." "Okay," Elspeth said, and for the first time, something in her face relaxed slightly. Just slightly, just enough. Lawrence was easier than she'd expected, and more complicated than she'd expected, in the way that quiet people often were. He was in his office by 7 most mornings. A room at the back of the house that had been a sitting room once still had the original wainscoting and a fireplace that no longer worked, and was now filled with books and 2 large monitors and a standing desk that he clearly didn't always stand at. He didn't want coffee brought. He didn't want to be checked on. He wanted the house to function around him the way a good engine functions. Not noticed, not felt, just working. What he did want, she discovered, was someone to eat with. Not always, not with ceremony, but on the days she made dinner, soup mostly, or pasta, or the chicken with preserved lemons her mother had taught her. He came out of his office at 6 and sat at the kitchen table and ate, and if Elspeth had things to say, he listened with full attention. And if Elspeth had nothing to say, he sat in comfortable silence, and occasionally he said something small and precise that turned out to be exactly the right thing. One evening in late February, Elspeth was upset about something at school, something involving a group project and a girl named Cassidy who had taken credit for work that wasn't hers. She explained this at length, with heat poking at her pasta. Lawrence listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Did anyone else in the group know what happened?" "Yes," Elspeth said, "but nobody said anything." "Then they know," Lawrence said, "and Cassidy knows they know." Elspeth considered this. So she's carrying it. You're not." A pause. "That's it? That's your advice?" "I didn't say it was advice. I said she's carrying it." He picked up his fork. "Whether that matters to you is up to you." Elspeth made a noise that was mostly exasperation, but had underneath it something that sounded like relief. She ate the rest of her pasta. By the time she went to do her homework, she looked lighter, some knot loosened. Loretta washed the dishes and thought about the way he had done that. Not solving, not dismissing, not telling her how to feel. Just naming what was true and stepping back. March came, and with it the Toronto trip. He was gone for 9 days. He left a number for emergencies and a printed list of Elspeth's schedule. Violin, orthodontist on the 6th, a school project due the 11th, and then he got in a taxi to the airport at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday, which was already Elspeth's bad day, and was gone. Elspeth did not take the Tuesday badly, or rather, she took it the way she took everything she had decided to take without complaint. She came home from school, dropped her backpack, went to her room, and did not appear until dinner. Loretta left a plate of toast and an apple on the kitchen counter at 4 within reach without requiring acknowledgement, and found them gone when she came to start dinner. On the fourth day, Elspeth came home from violin and sat at the kitchen table and watched Loretta peel potatoes. "Do you miss anyone?" she asked. Loretta considered the question. "Yes, who?" "My mother, mostly. She died a few years ago." Elspeth was quiet for a moment. "I miss my mom on Tuesdays," she said. "I don't know why Tuesday specifically. Grief doesn't need a reason," Loretta said. "It just picks a day and stays." Elspeth looked at her hands. "Does it get better?" "Not smaller. Just, you get bigger around it," she paused. "That's what my mother used to say anyway. I didn't understand it when she said it. Do you understand it now? More than I used to." Elspeth nodded slowly, the way children nod when they are storing something away for later. She went to get herself a glass of water and stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the street. Then she said, without turning around, "I'm glad you're here on Tuesdays." Loretta kept her eyes on the potatoes. "Me too," she said. Lawrence came back on a Saturday morning, carrying a bag of Montreal bagels. Actual bagels, boiled and wood-fired, the kind you could only get from the right place. And 2 coffees from a place on the departures level that he said was the only decent coffee in the Toronto airport. He set them on the counter, said, "Everything okay?" in the tone of someone who had been carrying a low-grade worry for 9 days, and was now setting it down carefully. And Lorette said yes, everything was fine, Elspeth was still asleep. He looked around the kitchen. Something had been cleaned that hadn't been cleaned before. The window over the sink, which had been filmed with years of cooking vapor. The screen door had been re-hinged. The loose bathroom tile had been re-grouted. She had done these things on the slow afternoons when Elspeth was at school, not because she'd been asked to, but because they had bothered her and she'd had the time. Lawrence noticed. He didn't say anything immediately. He made himself a coffee and leaned against the counter and looked at the window for a long moment. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I know. But you did. The tile was going to crack further if it sat," she said. "It was just a matter of time." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not surprise, exactly, more like recognition, as if something had slotted into place that he hadn't known was missing. "Thank you, Loretta," he said. She nodded and took one of the bagels and went to set the table. The offer from the Vancouver firm came in April. She found out because Elspeth told her in the car on the way home from violin, with the unfiltered bluntness of someone who did not yet understand that some information was meant to be delivered gently. "Dad might have to move to Vancouver," she said. Loretta kept her eyes on the road. "Oh, there's a company there. They want him to come run something. He said it's just a conversation, but he's been on the phone a lot." A pause. "He does that when it's not just a conversation." Loretta said nothing. She pulled up to the house and turned off the engine and sat for a moment. "Would you come with us?" Elspeth asked. "That's not really something I can answer," Loretta said carefully. "Why not? Because it's your dad's decision, and it's a big decision." Elspeth picked up her violin case and opened the car door. "I already told him I'm not going," she said. "I have violin, and Cassidy still owes me." She went inside. Loretta sat in the car for another minute in the quiet. She had been here 4 months. She had not planned to still be here at 4 months. She had planned, in the vague way of someone who couldn't yet see the ground clearly, to use this time as a bridge, a pause, a place to collect herself before whatever came next. She had a portfolio. She had references. The landscape architecture firm on Hollis Street had reached out twice in the past month. The ground was becoming visible again. She had not allowed herself to think too carefully about what it meant that she had stopped wanting to leave. She was in the garden, the back garden, which had been a neglected rectangle of lawn with 2 overgrown lilac bushes and a dead plum tree when she arrived, and was now the early stages of something else. Transplanted herbs and a cleared border, and the possibility of a perennial bed along the south fence. When Lawrence came out and sat on the back step, she knew he was there. She kept working, turning soil because she found that conversations went better when her hands were occupied, and there was no direct eye contact required. "Elspeth told you," he said. It wasn't a question. She mentioned Vancouver. He was quiet for a moment. "It's a serious offer. It would be significant financially, and it's interesting work, infrastructure at a scale I haven't operated at in a while." "It sounds like a good opportunity," Loretta said. She meant it. She was trying to mean it without feeling the weight of it. "Elspeth won't go." she told me. She's not wrong that it would disrupt things for her. He paused. She's at a good school. Her violin teacher here is. It took us 2 years to find the right teacher, and she has friends now, real ones. She didn't have those a year ago. Loretta put down the hand trowel and sat back on her heels. The April sun was thin but present, the first warmth in months. What do you want to do? She asked. I don't know, he said. And then, after a pause, that's not entirely true. I know what I want. I'm not sure it's reasonable. She waited. I want to stay, he said. I want to turn it down. I want things to continue. He stopped. He looked at the half-cleared garden bed, the cleared border, the lilac bushes that would bloom in 6 weeks if the weather held. As they are, he finished, quietly. She heard what he meant. She had been hearing it for weeks in small things. The way he said her name when he came in from the office, slightly different from how he said it in the first weeks, with a particular quietness that she had been carefully not examining. The way he had started coming to the kitchen earlier in the evenings. The way he had asked her once in passing whether she had ever thought about doing public space design again, and listened to her answer with the full, specific attention he usually reserved for Elspeth. Lawrence, she said, you don't have to say anything. I know. She looked at the soil on her hands, the dark Halifax earth. I wasn't planning to stay, she said. When I came here, I want you to know that. I know. I had a plan. I was going to use this time to get back on my feet and then move forward, find my own ground again. She paused. And then I didn't want to anymore. He was looking at her now. She could feel it without looking up. Not because of you, she said, or not only because of you, because of this. She gestured at the garden, at the house behind them, at nothing specific and everything at once. Because I started to feel like a person again here, and I don't think I had felt that in a long time. A long pause. The Vancouver offer, he said. I'm going to decline it. Don't decline it because of me. I'm not, he said. I'm declining it because Elspeth needs to be where she is. And because I've spent 12 years building something in Halifax, and I don't want to walk away from it. And because... He stopped again. He was not a man who found the next sentence easily when the next sentence mattered. Because when I got home from Toronto and I walked into that kitchen and the window was clean, I thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. He looked at his hands. I hadn't thought that in 4 years. Loretta was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, the plum tree is dead. I'm going to need to take it out. A pause. Okay, he said. I want to put in a serviceberry. Native for birds, blooms early. Elspeth will like it. She will, he agreed. It'll take a season to establish. That's fine, he said. We're not going anywhere. She did not move out of the spare room. Not immediately. Not in the way of declarations and rearranged furniture. Life in the house on South Park Street continued the way it had been continuing. Elspeth's Tuesday silences, the dinners that extended past 7, the cat brigadier who had, somewhere around the 6th week, decided that Loretta's presence was not a temporary condition after all, and began sleeping on her bed with the settled authority of an animal who has reevaluated a decision and found the new arrangement satisfactory. What changed was smaller than that, the quality of the silence when the 3 of them were in the same room, the way Lawrence looked up from his desk when she passed the open office door, not startled, not interrupting himself, just acknowledging. The way Elspeth had stopped prefacing requests with, "Can I ask you something?" and started simply asking. The Vancouver firm sent a follow-up inquiry in May. Lawrence declined it in 2 sentences. He didn't mention it until the following week, and then only in passing. The serviceberry tree went in on a Saturday in early June. Elspeth helped dig the hole which she announced was much harder than it looked, and which she would not be doing again, and then stood back and assessed the placement with the critical eye of a person who was going to be looking at this tree for a long time and wanted it right. "More to the left," she said. Lawrence and Loretta looked at the tree, then at each other. "She's right," Loretta said. He moved it to the left. It was not a dramatic moment. It was not the kind of moment that announces itself. But Elspeth, standing in the garden in her muddy boots with her hair coming loose from its braid, looked at the tree in its new position, and then at the 2 of them standing beside it, and something moved across her face. Recognition, or perhaps just satisfaction. The look of someone who has been watching for something and has finally seen it arrive. "Good," she said simply, and went inside to wash her hands. Lawrence and Loretta stood for a moment longer in the June afternoon, the light coming long and golden over the fence, the freshly turned earth still dark around the tree's base. She had come here with a plastic bag and a discharge form and nowhere particular to go. She had come here in a coat that wasn't warm enough and sat on a bench in a garden that was better in April and been handed a cup of coffee by a man who did not explain himself and did not need to. She had not been looking for any of this. She had been looking for solid ground. She had found it anyway.